Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at the dead zones for Honor. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X in case it differs on other platforms. But to start with the movement, we have about a 15% axial dead zone, which creates a central square shape. So that means you have to move further than 15% in the diagonals before any movement begins. And because it's axial, this restricts diagonal movement across the entirety of each axis. So 15% around each axis only moves you in one of four directions. In this case, perfectly to the right, perfectly forward, perfectly backward, and you don't start seeing diagonal movement until you break out of both axial dead zones, represented by the screen region. And this may be a little difficult to tell because you have some pretty steep or pretty slow um, movement or angle changes, so this might not be too obvious. But this is actually unscaled, meaning this axial dead zone doesn't scale the input, so any subtle angles within this region are lost. So it basically goes from 0 perfectly straight to 15% off to the side. And that will be a little more obvious with the camera. But for the movement speeds, we have two movement speeds available. One is this walk threshold in this lighter colored portion. And then once you reach the shaded region, you have a run. And it's a little difficult to tell on this graph, but there is this threshold is slightly gear shaped, so it's mostly circular, but there are these bevels right in the axial region. And this type of shape is created by creating an unscaled axial dead zone and then using the original values to calculate the magnitude except for within this region, within the axial region. So this essentially would be considered perfectly forward, which would get you the maximum vertical height for this, all within this dead zone. And then once you break out of this, it's the circle as it should be normally. But these striped thresholds represent the sprint threshold. So you can either hold sprint or you can toggle it. By default, you can toggle it. But if you currently it's set to toggle, but if you try to click it in this lighter region, you'll start a sprint, but it'll immediately cancel it. You can only formally toggle a sprint when running, and then when passing under this threshold, you cancel out. However, when you hold the stick, you can continue a sprint anywhere outside of the dead zone. These dotted lines represent guard directions, or I mean, sorry, dodge directions while in guard. So if you're on the forward section of this, you'll be dodging forward, and if you're on the horizontal sections, you'll be dodging horizontally, and if you're in the back section, you'll be dodging backwards. This can change when you run up against a wall. You can see that I'm doing a horizontal sidestep. That's just based on where the wall is forcing you. This threshold, or you can only dodge when moving back dodging versus you can only do a sidestep when in any other direction. And that about covers it for the movement dead zone. For the camera, We have a about 23%, at least for the horizontal portion, gear-shaped dead zone. And vertically, this is a little taller. You can see in the diagonal sections, it's not really circular, which is kind of strange. But vertically, it's slightly larger at about 25%. But it has the same about 15% angular restriction. So you can see that I can bob the stick up and down, and the camera is moving perfectly to the left, perfectly to the right. And you don't see diagonal movement until you break out of this. And you can see how sort of abrupt this is, that it's perfectly right here, and then you get a pretty strong diagonal once breaking through. That's because it being unscaled is it going from perfectly right to vertically at 15%. And this restriction should be obvious because of that around the vertical axis, but it's most obvious when capping the view like this, where you can see that when moving outside of the horizontal thresholds, it's very clear when blocking the view like this. The camera acceleration curve doesn't start at 0. I actually wasn't able to test the point right past the dead zone. For some reason, when testing that point, it could start out fast, but then slow down randomly after rotation. So I just threw a point on it as a rough estimate. I did not test right past the dead zone, but the other black nodes were test points. And you can see for them, the curve is generally an S shape. So it starts out pretty slow, then speeds up a bit, and then tapers off as you get to maximum stick tilt. And it being cropped by the dead zone, I mean, suggests, or starting faster than 0, suggests that one, it's not scaled, but whether it's scaled to a smaller dead zone within the displayed dead zone or isn't scaled at all and is just mapped around 0 is unknown, but it's obviously being cropped some by the dead zone. For the diagonal acceleration, that means how fast you can turn. As you can see, my stick can lean outside of this circular range, and that means that if it wasn't normalized, you could potentially move faster than 100% in diagonal directions, and that's what can happen here if your stick is able to move up to as you can see, my stick can't lean too far this, but if it could move perfectly 100% vertically and horizontally, you could move up to a maximum of about 40% faster than you can left or right, up or down. And that might also suggest that the curve is applied per axis, but I wasn't able to very clearly verify that, though that may be more the case. The vertical sensitivity, I couldn't accurately test. Some rough estimate would be that the vertical sensitivity is about 70 to 75% the horizontal. So, and there are of course no specific vertical options to customize that. But that covers it for both the movement and the camera. However, there are dead zones for the guard directions, and this actually has a suite of options available to it. And starting with the default, we'll switch the graph to look at that. So we can see that based on the in-game graph, this is pretty similar. However, the dead zone in reality is quite a bit better. There's only, well, there's technically 4 directions with this character. However, you can see that the stick icon moves when passing out of the dead zone, even if it's in the same direction. So you can see that this threshold is basically an 80% circle, but there's those slight kind of cog shapes for this gear sticking out, and the height of which is that 15% axial dead zone we saw with both the movement and the camera. So that's the central dead zone, and we can see that the angles, however, are pretty much exactly as displayed in the game. So you can see we can just bob right around this for the up and side stances. And this yellow region represents the hidden stance or the full block types. And the stripe threshold, as well as the faded threshold in-game, is sort of a buffer range. So if you move in this range initially, you're getting using a directional block. But once you access your hidden or full block stance, this range widens, and to get to a side block, you have to move past this stripe threshold to switch back. This is sort of interesting. I'm not sure what the benefit of this buffer range is. You think you could it'd be fine just having a flat threshold, just as you would for the other directional guards, but otherwise that is what it is. But if we look at what the maximum values look like, we can see that the shape is slightly different, and for the left and right guard, and that's because of this axial dead zone. You can see that it's not an angle threshold, it's just a flat threshold here. And you can see that we have this correct threshold for the hidden stance, and then it moves into a directional block sooner than it would, and that's again because of this axial dead zone. It's taking the input once it goes in here and setting it to 0, which would be within that angular range normally, but it's just widening it because this dead zone is 15%. So overall, correct, but the axial dead zone makes it a little different because of that. And if we now look at the minimum, for everything, it is taking a little bit, but you can see that the guard mode dead zone is at maximum and default is 20, and this is actually the slider is generally accurate, meaning or at least as far as its scale. So at 20 it's actually at 80%, and at 0 it would be 0%. However, that 15% axial dead zone is creating a central dead zone, so we do have a 15% axial dead zone here. And again, despite having a really thin up direction, it's actually widened because of the dead zone. So since this is all would be considered 0, this is widening the range for the up direction. And similarly for the hidden stance. What is interesting is the buffer range. So the buffer range angle is accurate. So you can see that it ends right here. But you can see as far as the magnitude, it's actually reduced. If I fall short like this, it cancels out into a directional guard instead, and compared to the display where it shows the entirety of the magnitude would do that. So that's a kind of interesting discrepancy. It's always this magnitude right here is an 80%. This is part of the 80% circular threshold. So this threshold seems to be tied to that rather than just being an angular threshold. So we're going back to default, but instead we're going to look at rotating the widget, and we're going to rotate it 45 degrees. And we can see here that this is, again, perfectly reflected. However, you can see that the central dead zone is the same. The central dead zone doesn't rotate, or the angular thresholds, or I mean specifically the axial dead zones, don't rotate. The central shape is the same and has the same axial dead zone, but the angular thresholds have translated correctly, with the minor exception of this kind of buffer range is perfectly aligned with the axial dead zone. So you can see that that is perfectly aligned there. Alright, so for the last section of this, not every character has a hidden stance or full block. Some just have the three guarding directions. And for them, instead of having this full block range, it's a perfect division. So this is the default settings, just rotated 45 degrees, like what we just went over. And you can see that this threshold just becomes the dividing line for when you switch between the left and right guards. And if we go back to the default, I mean, you can see that everything else is otherwise the same. However, this swap range actually is affected by this central dead zone, and you can see that it sort of biases to the right. You can see that it's sort of glitchy, that it's kind of twitching as I move the stick around in this range. When testing, it seemed pretty consistent that you'd have to move all the way across this range before it would flip to either the right or left. However, I test, basically the way I test is moving perfectly horizontally and perfectly vertically, which this glitching behavior might just be because in practice you're moving in diagonals all the time. So essentially it's the left part of this axial threshold that's the actual switch, and this applies to all the other dead zone sizes as well. This leftward negative 15% threshold swaps between those two sides. So that about covers things. I think it's interesting that they have this level of customization for the guarding. I think it's pretty cool to have. You know, I think that, you know, dividing it into 90-degree segments would be pretty intuitive for if you had 4 guard options. But having customization like this is pretty incredible and cool to have. Overall, I think if there would be any improvement to make, it'd be removing this 15% axial dead zone, and that would improve the movement. So the movement could be perfectly radial. There may be even a radial dead zone under this, but it's smaller than the axial portion, so it's not visible. But removing this axial dead zone would allow there to be a radial dead zone, but also full diagonal movement. And for the camera, this section in between these actual portions doesn't look circular, but having a circular dead zone and removing this axial dead zone would allow full diagonal movement with no cropped angles, so that would be a little smoother as well. And would make a minor change to the guard directions, though that's there's so much range for that really doesn't matter. But otherwise, that covers it. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.